Okay, so this week is start of a new month, and the project that I planned for August and can run into the first week of September as well is, well, it can be a choice of either lino prints, which one are you interested in, or night scenes. So the bit I'll demonstrate is night scenes. Or you could combine the two and do a lino print of a night scene, which I think might work quite interesting, might be quite good, might be quite interesting. So that's the theme for this month. There isn't a class next week because I'm basically away. So we've got 3 weeks in August and then the one in September. So I'll just run it as one long project. Yeah, so next week I'm away hanging at the Wapping Group show. So we're taking part in this exhibition. So if anybody fancies coming along, I'll send an email about this out as well. But if you wanted a leaflet, it's the Wapping Group, which I belong to, and we basically paint outdoors every Wednesday, somewhere around London, or places connected to the Thames, basically. So that's what the group's all about. I brought one of my paintings in, so this one's going to be in the exhibition. So that's one I did, started last year and then finished it in April. Well, I finished it a couple of weeks ago, actually, a little bit here. I did a couple of sessions outdoors on that one, and a little bit of work and photos. So this one will be one. I basically have 6 pictures in the exhibition and a couple of reserves, so if any sell, the reserves will go in.
That's so nice. We saw the work in progress, didn't we?
Yeah, I did bring it in before, I think, yeah, the main brought it in the first day. So that's one that will be in the exhibition. This is the book about the Wapping Group, so if anyone wants to have a quick look at that, you're very welcome. This was up to 2021. So it's quite an old group. It's been, at that time, it's been going for about 80 years. So it's a long-established group. And basically, we meet up every Wednesday and go painting outdoors. So that's that. What else can we show you? Yeah, so for the theme, I brought this. I remember I did this painting. So this was a kind of night scene. This is the sort of thing I quite enjoy, night scenes. I quite like painting. I actually did this as a demo for an art club. So it's quite quickly painted, quite roughly in a way, but sometimes they just go well, and other times they look a bit of a mess at the end of the evening. This one I was quite pleased with. Southend Art Club wants to use this image for their poster, so their exhibition is in September, so I probably won't get a chance to take part because I'm going to be away. But one of the things I like about night scenes is that you've got all the light sources within the painting, so it creates quite interesting lighting. And some bits will be lit and other bits will go into shadow. And it's not sort of necessarily like a logical light coming from one direction, shadows one side like the other. So you get unusual atmospheric effects, which I enjoy. That's that. And then I found a couple of others. Examples. This was, I had quite a few goes at going down on the seafront painting fireworks. That's probably one of the best ones. Most of them were a bit of a mess, but that was me half fireworks. And this was, I just had to go sitting outside the Crooked Billet one evening and had to go painting the scene there. So this one's more of a sketch really, so I won't necessarily show this, but I quite fancy painting that scene at night sometimes. Perhaps on a bigger scale, maybe go a little bit wider. So sometimes just using the paints as a sketching medium rather than a painting. So that's something you can do. So that's a few ideas. At the weekend, I went away at the weekend and did a bit of painting. So this was one of the paintings I did. And it occurred to me that most of my drawing with paintings, I do with, I paint with oil paints. So if you like working with oil paints or acrylics, this can work quite well, or possibly even pastels. Doesn't really apply to watercolours as such. But I tend to quite often draw with the brushes themselves. Just something maybe like that. Or the other thing I use are these brush pens. So they're called Tombow pens, and they're what I use for my sketches anyway. So I did have a sketch somewhere, but if I was drawing something like this, instead of just doing an outline to start with, sometimes I will just almost just kind of fill it in and make a tonal image, where I'm kind of working up to an edge or working down to an edge and just kind of blocking areas in. So it's a little bit more like how, like using a paintbrush rather than using a pencil as such. The nice thing about these is these are water soluble felt pens, so they usually wash out. I think because this paper's not taken very well. If it was a board, that would wash out and I could just completely get rid of what I've got there. The boards I've got, this one I used this morning. I'll try a bit more of that. Yeah, I think this one isn't very well common. Yeah, that will wash out next in. So it means I can make alterations quite quickly. Whereas with graphite pencils, I have a job shifting it sometimes. So it's nice for sketching graphite, but I prefer paint or these if I'm going to do a painting. So as I say, the other option is just to use a little bit of paint, I've got some acrylic here. And what I tend to do is just have some very watery acrylic or oil paint. I usually use oil paint. And so this, I would literally just kind of do very, very washy paint, something a bit like that, and draw out like that. The other thing is having like a nice new brush that's really sharp. Now, this is a very cheap brush, but it's got a nice shape to it. So it's not. They tend to, after a couple of weeks, they'll just go all woolly and lose their shape. I can kind of work up to an edge quite quickly and just draw in the shapes that I want really. So for painting, things like oil painting or acrylic painting, this is probably as quick as, because as well as getting the line and the edges, I'm getting tonal values as well. And I can get a very quick impression of how the image is going to look. Again, I can sort of block in chimneys, maybe roof lines, this sort of thing. I know I'm not being very accurate here, but and then the advantage of that is you've then got like a tonal underpainting. So if I want to put darker colours over white or something like that, I've already got an undercoat, so I won't need so much paint to cover. So I'll show this other painting that I started yesterday. So with this one, I did exactly that, what I'm doing here with this. So this just looked like a very washy, light black and white image. And then things like the tree, I made it quite dark underneath, but it meant that I could then put quite thin paint over the top. And this particular green is very transparent. So if I just put it over white or over pale grey, that would show through. Because that's like a dark underpainting. Yeah. So, yeah, go ahead.
Where is it?
It's Putney. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so we were painting in Putney yesterday. So it needs a lot more work, but that is, it's a way, how I find is probably one of the easiest ways of just getting something in place to start with. So again, it can be quite daunting painting with a brush or drawing with a brush, but if you've just got like a cheap bit of paper and a bit of acrylic, it's quite nice to just experiment and treat it as a sketch that you don't necessarily have to go paint. But if you're somebody that feels they're reliant on drawing with pencils first, as I say, it doesn't apply to watercolours, because watercolours you really do need a pencil outline or something like that. But if you're thinking like oils, acrylics, something like that sort of medium, this is quite a nice way of working. Now this is acrylic on paper, so it won't wash out as easy as as oil paints would on a bit of board. You might, if you make mistakes, you might have to just add a bit of white and overpaint. So yeah, I just thought I'd kind of share that as an idea, if any of you fancied trying that as a way of starting your painting. And this is sort of very much the way I was taught to paint. When I went to art school, we were encouraged to sort of perhaps start off fairly loosely and then adjust the shapes, wash bits out, put bits in, do a tonal underpainting, and then colour over the top. So it's quite a nice traditional way of building an image up. Okay, anybody want to ask? Any questions?
Say that last bit again. You did the drawing.
Yeah, you some sort of tonal underpainting,
Yeah.
or tonal drawing,
Yeah.
just using light and dark really, and then you can let that dry. So yesterday it was a reasonably warm day, and the paint dried really quickly. So when I came to put like the colour on this one, it probably some bits might be wet still, but like all these, there's little bits like there. That's the underpainting showing through. There's a bit up here where it's still showing through.
Because you don't always do that, do you? You often go like one.
Yeah, sometimes I go in with colour. Yeah.
Yeah. How do you decide when you?
Because this was complicated, I felt like I wanted to draw out and feel where everything was going to go
Right.
first.
Yeah,
And
it
you
gives you
get a
two
sense.
chances to plot it all.
Yeah, and this was like, if I hadn't got something to follow, it would have been really hard to paint that. without
Yeah.
something
Yeah.
to follow. So
Interesting.
yeah, I think it depends what you're doing. Yeah, different approaches suit different subjects.
Almost the harder the composition, the more you might.
Yeah, for me it's worth doing a tonal drawing first.
We could do that with pastels as well.
You could. Yeah. In fact, you could. The other thing you could do is you can do almost like a tonal painting underneath. Let that dry and put pastel over the top. And sometimes can be quite nice. What I find with pastel is you get a lot of the little bits of white of the paper showing through. Sometimes I want to get rid of that. So kind of wash drawing to start with, let that dry and get pastel on the top. Could work quite nicely, I think.
Paul?
Yep.
Could you use that technique, the underpainting, with acrylics?
Yeah, you can, yeah, absolutely, yeah. The only difficulty with acrylics is they dry quite quick, and you might have trouble washing bits out.
Yeah.
But yeah, you can, because it's so thin anyway. You might